Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture community conversation on youth biosecurity education. I'm Julie Smith, Research Associate Professor at the University of Vermont, and I want to go over a few logistics before turning things over to the moderator of this session. Our meeting is being hosted by the University of Arizona, thanks to Dr. Betsy Green and Ashley Wright. Joanna Cummings at the University of Vermont, Dr. Chris Heine of Oklahoma State University, and Dr. Susan Kerr, who retired from Washington State University Extension, also assisted with organizing the Youth Biosecurity Education Community Conversations. During this third session in the series on youth biosecurity education, we will be talking with an extension specialist and a state veterinarian. To get started, I will provide a quick background on the project I lead. I'm Dr. Julie Smith. I'm currently the project director of the Animal Disease Biosecurity Coordinated Agricultural Project funded by USDA NIFA. Through this project, we have created the new Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture website, 6 online learning modules that we introduced in the first session of this community conversation series, and a set of hands-on activities that we will be discussing in the 4th session of this series. The central theme of all the project activities was exploring and influencing the human side of biosecurity. How do you A, convince people it is important, B, explain what needs to be done, and C, get it done consistently? If you want to know more about the project activities overall, visit agbiosecurityproject.org. Whether you are a volunteer or an educator with 4-H or FFA or any other kind of instructor, specialist, professional, or consultant, we are glad you are interested in youth biosecurity education. Before introducing today's speakers, I'd like Joanna Cummings to take us on a quick tour of the Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture website, where the learning modules and other educational materials can be found. Joanna is a communications professional based at the University of Vermont who works for the Biosecurity Project. She showed us exactly how to find the learning modules and accompanying resources in the first session in this series, but that's not the only thing you can find on the website. So let's take a quick look at how the site is organized. Joanna?
The Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture website, it is all about livestock and poultry biosecurity. In the future, we're looking at adding crop biosecurity, but right now we're just looking at livestock, and I'm hovering over the livestock section of the navigation so you can see all of the species that are covered. And we also have some good information about wildlife and feral animals. The site is developed for biosecurity recommendations for anyone who's raising livestock anywhere in the US. This is not specific to any region, but biosecurity recommendations really are universal. Although there's specifics for some livestock, they really are, a lot of the concepts are universal. Our site is based on the aspects of prevent diseases, how to detect them, and then how to respond if your livestock do have a disease outbreak. I'm hovering over the navigation on the website so you can see all the different topics that are under the prevent section. And also I wanted to point out that we have a really great section on biosecurity planning, where there is actual documentation there for any producer to be able to assess their disease risks and then be able to put together a plan on how to prevent and respond to those risks. Under the detect section, we go through information on how to observe your animals, what diagnostics are, and then aspects of communicating risk, which could be to your employees, to visitors, to anyone in the community. And then under the response section, if you have a disease outbreak, what you have to do to be able to respond to the diseases and get your farm back into production eventually. I also want to highlight the training section, and in it is where you can go to the Youth 4-H and FFA section to find our biosecurity learning modules. And we also have a really great section of a blog that gets into more detail about biosecurity, and lots of interesting articles that were written by, some of them written by our students at the University of Vermont. So please check it out at healthyagriculture.org.
Great. Thank you, Joanna, for that great overview. Now to introduce and start off the conversation with today's featured guest, I'd like to introduce Dr. Betsy Green. Betsy is a full professor and the State Horse Extension Specialist with the University of Arizona. Okay, Betsy, it's all yours.
Okay, so last time we heard all about swine. Today we're bringing other livestock, large and small, into the conversation. We'll discuss types of issues, prevention, solutions, and all kinds of information out there for keeping our animals and us safe. Sarah Smith is graduated from WSU in 1996. I was actually there when she was doing that, and her master's in 98. And so she worked for a short time at USDA and Animal Plant Health Inspection Service as a quarantine officer in the San Francisco airport. She served as a legislative assistant for the Oregon Cattlemen's Association, and she's currently a regional extension specialist with WSU Extension based out of Grant and Adams counties in central Washington. Her primary responsibilities are to provide educational outreach from farm to harvest for beef, cattle, sheep, and hog producers. And she has specialized outreach programs that focus on animal care and handling, food animal quality assurance at the ranch and farm level, and animal feeding operations and harvest facilities. She also has done quite a bit with sheep shearing schools and low stress cattle handling seminars for producers, which have been highly attended. And she also does a lot of quality assurance training as well for pork, beef, and sheep. Now, Dr. Amber Idle grew up on her family's dairy farm in Pennsylvania and then joined the veterinary profession shared by her father and her sister. Wow, a family of veterinarians. She worked in a large animal private practice for 9 years before joining the Washington State Department of Ag in 2013 as a field veterinarian. Dr. Idle is now the Assistant State Veterinarian at Washington State Department of Ag and managing animal health and animal disease traceability programs. She earned her degree in veterinary medicine at the University of Pennsylvania and in 2003, and a master's in animal welfare from the University of British Columbia in 2014. So as we go and we're talking about this, we're going to start out with Sarah Smith and talk about things that she has from that angle of the extension, an extension person, a specialist with livestock. So with the cancellation of fairs and shows, we've had a huge increase in jackpot shows. I know we have had those in Arizona, and my friend and colleague in Minnesota had the same. And there's also been privately organized shows, both livestock, horses, large and small, ruminants, everything else. So Sarah's going to talk to us. She's going to share some slides and talk to us about the challenges for organizing and or attending those shows concerning biosecurity. And we'll also have Dr. Idle hopping in when appropriate too, to look at it from both the extension person managing the youth, but also the state veterinarian managing the regulations and the safety of the people and the animals as well. Go for it, Sarah.
Thanks, Betsy. It's nice to be able to talk to you guys and see what some of the other parts of the country are doing. And I guess I was a little shocked to see how many fairs had been canceled where there was no shows or virtual only. Being out here in Washington, that's what we kind of expected, but I didn't realize that most of that was what was happening even in the Midwest, because I hear a lot of shows. And so, yeah, I've seen a lot of shows, like Betsy says, pop up, jackpot shows, independent shows, and I continue to see a lot of those coming about, even as we have some large national shows canceled, then moving out of those states into other states. And especially with kids doing a lot of online schooling, I'm seeing parents and people willing to travel a greater distance. So we are seeing people cross state lines and move farther. So There's two issues that I think arise there is one, the potential for disease spread from that standpoint, and that people are going to go to new shows that will require different requirements. We see, like I said, we see animals come from a lot of different locations, and not only are they coming from different locations, they're going to different locations. And I think one of the larger concerns that we saw here in Washington State was when these independent shows were popping up. They weren't typically popping up at our fairgrounds and under some of our typical regulations and rules and requirements that require vet inspections and health papers. So we also saw them at farms or parks type of fields. So not only maybe were the facilities not adequate, we could have had interface with other domestic animals or even other birds or rodents. So when you start looking at that, we have a potential for disease spread. And in my location, the fairgrounds is in the city area. However, we have a lot of feedlots in the area and a lot of cattle. We have the largest hog operation in Washington. And so when some of these independent ones pop up within a bird's flying distance, there's greater concern that we could have disease spread. Also, most of these shows are non-terminal. And so that means the animals have to go home. And a lot of these animals are hitting lots of shows. And so they might pick up a disease at one show, be shedding it at show 2, and we see the symptoms by show 3. So I think it's really important that individuals that are participating in these fairs not only know what the show requirements are, but I sometimes have heard shows say, well, the requirement is this, but we're not checking health papers. Even if they're not checking health papers, you need to have health papers for 2 reasons. One, it's in the best interest of your animals and helps protect them. And in the event that you were to get stopped, you'll be legal. But 2, we want to make sure that we keep these animal ag industries viable in our own area.
Hey Sarah, just a quick question. Can we find out from the side of the law and regulations, Dr. Idle, is there anything that these people, that are people checking these shows or anything like that?
Yeah, thanks, Betsy. That's a great question. And Sarah brings up some great points here. A lot of people don't like regulations, but regulations were put into place mostly by industry groups themselves. And some of that's just protecting us from ourselves and protecting us maybe from others. So really in Washington, as the state vet's office, our role is to keep diseases out. And so it is a huge problem with these independent shows cropping up because there aren't vets on staff checking these animals in. There aren't people there to make sure that those requirements are being met. And every state has different animal health requirements. And often the requirements, especially in cattle and swine and sheep and goats, we require official ID. And the reason we do that is because when we do have a disease outbreak, we need to be able to trace those animals back to farm of origin. We need to know where they came from and where they went. And if there's no health paper and there's no ID, we're unable to do that. So at the state vet's office, we're very much concerned about both animal health and animal disease traceability and the risks with these types of events popping up where we don't know about them and we don't have any representation there to help make sure that people are compliant with the law.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and I echo that. As an extension person, but also a person who's involved in the show industry, I look at a certificate of veterinary inspection and working with my own vet and the requirements within a state is not only is it to protect the area's animals, but it also protects mine. By every animal having to have a health paper coming to that show, there should be hopefully less risk. And so I see it as a proactive nature, and when we consider what we're investing in these show animals nowadays, we want everybody to have a health paper showing up there so that these animals can have the best care and make sure that we're not spreading diseases. So that's kind of what I've seen happening with these independent and jackpot shows. I don't want to deem them as bad. I can see them as a huge opportunity, but we got to stay within the guidelines of the rules and regulations, protect animal agriculture within a state and crossing state lines.
Yeah, and just to go on what you said, Sarah, I think there would be nothing worse than having a human pandemic and an animal pandemic at the same time. So
Oh my,
following these regulations would certainly help us prevent that from happening.
yeah.
Um,
So, yeah, go ahead, Sarah. You go ahead.
Yeah. So, and then some of the other things that I saw, we saw it happen before this, with this show season happening. We see a lot of people looking in that market lamb pen, either at the fair, virtual shows. There was a little bit of people selling independently out ewe lambs or gilts rather than taking them to market. And so I always get the question of, you know, I see a nice ewe lamb or a gilt in a market lamb show. Should I bring it home and breed it? And I think there's about 3 different things that I say you need to ask yourself. One, the biosecurity concern, especially when we look at pigs, and some of you guys were on last week's. There's a lot of disease concern of spread when we bring these groups of pigs together. So they're going to pick up whatever the neighboring pig had, and you're going to take it back to your farm. And so there's a lot of problems there. So if you are going to do it, you need to make sure that you quarantine and isolate. There's also probably lots of reason why that fancy gilt or fancy ewe lamb made her way into a market pen rather than staying in a breeder pen back home or being sold. And it's probably because maybe she wasn't the ideal maternal animal. So we have some genetic diseases that are quite problematic in all of our livestock species, but especially in sheep and hogs. The good thing is that we can genetically test for them. So if you're hard pressed to think that you have to do it, I probably had that animal genetically tested before I had her put into my herd and introduce a gene that I really didn't want to have. And then last, I always tell people, especially when we start managing these animals, you'll notice that we never pull heifers out of feedlots to put them back into our beef cow herd. And there's a reason for that, is that those animals have been managed and we have a growth plane on them that really isn't conducive to their reproductive function. And the same thing happens with some of our ewe lambs and gilts to a sense. And so, you know, we may have compromised that reproductive performance of that animal and not set them up to be the best one. So it's not something I am a proponent of. I know it happens. And so, you know, I'd say don't do it. But if you're going to do it, be sure that you take some of these precautions to protect your animals as they go back onto the farm.
So Sarah, I'll say that Amy Parrott is one of my colleagues in 4-H in Yuma, and she's mentioned that part of the problem is that shows are not necessarily organized by 4-H or FFA leaders. They're organized by people who see it as a fundraiser a lot of times, and they don't necessarily care about or feel like they have to follow the rules because they don't understand necessarily the potential impact. Mm-hmm. So either Dr. Idle or Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. One thing I wanted to say is when we think about fairs, it's very much like thinking about livestock markets. So we have this point of commingling where when animals come together, not only are they coming with the diseases they were exposed to at their home farm, which maybe they're completely adapted to and maybe they have immunity to, they're bringing some of that with them, but they're also going to be exposed at those markets or fairs and potentially, you know, bring that home to you. So even if it's coming from somebody who has a great vaccination program or whatever, when they get to that fair, they get to that point of commingling, they're being exposed to a whole new set of diseases that you may or may not be thinking about. And the other thing to think about with these types of cases too are, think about any kind of movement of an animal is stress on that animal. So they're basically being, you know, it's like being picked up by aliens in a spaceship. You're getting put into a trailer or in the back of a car and you're being transported to a different planet and there you are, and you're being exposed to all these different animals you've never seen before, and they're all like aliens to you, and you're picking up their diseases and you're totally stressed out. It's like a bad dream. And so I think we have to remember that these animals are under a tremendous amount of stress in the terms that we think about it, but also think about load of viruses or pathogen load and exposure and what kind of stress that puts on their immune system. So we have multiple types of stressors here that are going to put those animals at risk for breaking with diseases when they get home to your home farm.
Well, and your discussion about the taking them home, leads into a question. What is a good quarantine time and location for sheep and goats?
So I can start with that, and then Sarah, if you want to add on as well. At the state, we typically recommend that you quarantine all animals that come home from a fair for at least 30 days. And during that period, we'd like to see you tempt them daily. So not only tempt them before when they get home, but let's tempt them before they go to the fair so you know what normal is. Let's tempt them when they're at the fair, and then let's tempt them when they get home and look for changes in trends over time. So if you see, hey, my sheep, the temp went up 2 degrees and everybody else in the pen is normal, that might be early indication that disease is going to break. So we usually recommend 30 days, at least 30 feet from all other animals on a premises. And we recommend temping daily at the same time of day to monitor trends over time.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Idle on that time frame. And the one other thing that I add is, especially if you have a flock or a herd at home, you're going to want to protect that one. So that 30 feet is minimum. If you can have a separate barn for your show animals to come into and that they stay at so that they're not even within the same distance. And then when you feed, you always feed your healthy animals first and go to your quarantine second. And then make sure that you clean your boots and your clothes, because even though you may have went inside and spent 5-6 hours between chores time, if you go back out with those dirty boots or the same clothes, you can do a reinfection of those. So you kind of want to think of, you want to go to your healthiest animals first, end up with the most potential risk at the end, and always clean before you head back out to your new groups.
And we had one other quick question, because I want to make sure we give you guys a chance to get through your information. But has African swine fever changed the health regulations or recommendations in the different states? There's Washington in this case. Pennsylvania has made a 14-day CVI requirement for all commingled hogs and a terminal requirement for swine commingled for more than 72 hours.
Yeah, that's going to vary state to state, and I am aware that that's the regulation in Pennsylvania. And if I remember correctly too, they can't get off the trailer until they've been inspected by a veterinarian. And so that's the other piece of this. I mean, with African swine fever, it's certainly brought to light some of the additional risk factors we have with spreading disease. African swine fever is a tricky one because it's usually a slow clinical onset. And so they think that when African swine fever gets here, we may not recognize it right away because the clinical signs aren't dramatic. So I think there's limitations. I mean, we want the veterinarian there. We want those CVIs. We want those health papers done. But we also recognize that there's limitations, that that animal is only being deemed healthy on that specific day and that specific moment when that specific veterinarian is looking at them. So I think, you know, the limitation is, okay, we let them off the truck. They looked healthy, but are they still healthy tomorrow and the next day and the next day? So I think, you know, one of the nice things to think about with fairs are, it's not so much even the day they're unloaded. We're going to catch some on that unloading day, but there's going to be plenty more animals based on what I described with stress that are going to break with disease on day 2, 3. Usually it's day 3 where you're going to start seeing clinical signs, but depending on the incubation period of that disease, it could be anywhere from 3 days to, you know, 3 months, you know, so just something to think about that, yeah. But yeah, back to the question, ASF is definitely on our radar. We are doing a lot of tabletop exercises trying to plan for that one, but let's just hope it doesn't get here.
Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope. Okay, so Sarah, I think you have another slide for us to talk about.
I do, and this is one I've seen over the years, and as I said, I raise livestock and I purchase online, and so it provides a lot of opportunity. I see it as being able to bring in new genetics, but especially when we look at like us here in the Pacific Northwest, where we're very limited on our pig numbers for show pigs. It's what we have to use to bring pigs in. And so, you know, it's provided a great opportunity to exchange some genetics across the US. You don't have to go to the sale. You can set it at the convenience of your home and do it. But I think there's some things you really have to consider when you do this, because you've now made a considerable investment. And as Amber or Dr. Idle said, we have some opportunities to create some great stress in these animals as we move them back out to our home. And so one of the things that I'm seeing is you're buying off of a video, a description that's by the owner, there might be a video with the picture, but there's typically not a vet inspection and you're not seeing the whole herd. So when we go to certain sales, there will be a vet inspection to even have those animals there. The vets will look over them, and usually sale operations would not allow sick animals. But when we're at a facility where it's just online, it's a little bit of a buyer's beware market. So you kind of want to do some investigation that way. I've definitely heard of animals that look different, that they weren't as thrifty, or maybe that they didn't have as much muscle as they thought. So really know who you're buying from. Buy from reputable breeders, have some discussions with them rather than just hitting the buy button at the day of sale. And like I said, there's some disease issues with the herd of origin, but I think where I get more concerned is when we start trying to move these animals back out to the buyer. And there's lots of great transporters out there that are licensed and bonded and do a very nice job of cleaning their trailers, making sure that those animals are in separate pens and providing as little stress as possible. There's also the opportunity for people to put as many in a trailer and get them transported out, and maybe not following biosecurity rules, and we might be mixing, you know, animals from 5 or 6 different farms, different ages, and then we put the stress factor that Dr. Idle talked about it, and by the time that animal gets off the trailer at your home, it's sick. And then that really brings up the big last issue that has kind of drove me nuts with these sales a little bit, is that there's no guarantee of a CVI. You as the buyer have to request it, and you're the one that's responsible for having it when you're importing these animals into your state. And so just because they didn't offer it doesn't mean that you shouldn't request it. And it might cost you extra. I mean, you're the one buying it, needing, a lot of times when you buy, you're buying it at that site, or they're selling at their home. So you might need to get an animal from Oklahoma to Washington State. Therefore, it's my responsibility to pay for a vet to go out there and do a CVI to get that animal legal.
Just clarifying, certificate of veterinary inspection, correct?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, health paper, certificate of veterinary inspection to cross that state line. Also beware of cattle. You're going to likely need haul slips and or brand slips depending on which states you're coming in and out of. So I think these are some great opportunities, but there's more due diligence that you have to do as a buyer yourself when buying and working to get these animals transported out.
So Sarah, I think that's a great leeway, and I want to promote a website called interstatelivestock.com, and you can get on that website and you can say what type of animal you want to move, what state your origin state is, and where the destination state is for those animals, and it'll walk you through based on the class of animal, the age, the sex, the breed, whatever, and it'll tell you what the requirements are for each state. So anyway, that's super helpful. And the other thing I was going to mention is, you know, Sarah had mentioned how, hey, sometimes you purchase an animal and then you get it and you're like, is that the one I bought? Well, hey, you know, it's really important to have official ID in those animals, or individual identification in those animals, so that when that sale occurs, you kind of want to know, does it have an ID, and does it come with the same ID? Because animals can look the same, and we all know this happens at markets too, where you bought this one and it got sorted into the other person's pen and it ended up on someone else's truck, and the next thing you know, we don't know where that animal is, and you know, and who got it. So make sure you get what you bought.
So, you know, speaking of getting what you bought, or maybe getting more than you bargained for, you have a little bit of a case study, so to speak, to share with us. So maybe we can ask Sarah to change out and let you share the screen and talk to us about what happens when you get a little bit more than what you bargained for.
Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a case study. I was in private practice for about 10 years, and when I was in practice, I was kind of fortunate or unfortunate to come across a really interesting case I thought I would share with you today. And this will help kind of exemplify some of the biosecurity tips that Sarah and I both reviewed with you today to show how those things are important. I'm kind of trying to roll through this as quick as I can. Here we go. Whoops. Go back one. So I got this phone call, and I ended up being the vet to go out, and this person called and said, hey, you know, my cow's really not doing well. She looks really bad. I need somebody out here right away. You know, it's just one, but she's just went downhill really fast. And so the first thing that I wanted to put out there is a biosecurity tip for both you and your veterinarian. Don't forget to remind your veterinarian, because sometimes we forget. It's, you know, it's really important to wear the right clothes when you go out to a farm. Wear coveralls and wear boots that you can disinfect. This is so important. And make sure on the bottom, like some boots have those really thick soles with, you know, that really deep and can put manure up in there. Really important to have boots that you can actually get the manure out of and clean and disinfect. So I just wanted to throw that out there for everybody, that even veterinarians or potential fomites can spread, you know, those boots can spread disease. So we want to be really careful. So I got the call, I went out to the farm, and the first thing we're going to do is we want to know the history. We want to get as much information about this animal as we can. The history, sometimes as veterinarians and you as leaders can figure out, you know, you might actually know, you have an idea about what it might be just based on the history. So, hey, how long has this been going on? They're like, oh, you know, not very long. It just kind of came on really suddenly. And when did you first notice the clinical signs? Well, maybe 2 or 3 days ago, but it's gotten worse really quickly. She's off feed. You know, are there any other sick animals? Nope, just one. Do you have any new additions to the herd? No, we haven't had any new additions. What about a travel history? Well, yeah, we've been going to some fairs. We went to the Puyallup Fair a couple months ago, but it's been a while. How about you? Have you traveled anywhere? You know, we want to know if the owners have traveled, because with a lot of foreign animal diseases, maybe we could bring back something like African swine fever. We could bring back foot and mouth disease. So asking that question, where have the owners traveled? What's the vaccination history? That will help us know, is it an endemic disease that we have vaccinated for that's unlikely to be? Or could it be an endemic disease and they're breaking with something like a respiratory disease because they aren't well vaccinated? The other thing is fence line contact with other herds. So maybe like as veterinarians, we know in the region that, hey, there's a respiratory outbreak in some horses or some cattle, and we know that there's fence line contact. We might be able to put it together as that way too. And then we also know that there's certain diseases that can spread between species. So are they co-housed with other animals? You know, are sheep and goats being co-housed with cattle? Are horses being co-housed with, pigs? You know, whatever it might be. Or, you know, you learned about pigs in your last meeting. So are pigs and birds being co-housed? That's a huge concern for swine influenza, which I know you've already heard about. So in this case, the travel history was really interesting, right? Because they had just been at the Puyallup Fair, but it had been a while, like it'd been 2 months. So you think if something was going to be a problem, we would have known about it by then. So when I got there to the farm, this is what I found on physical exam findings. This is what this poor cow looked like. You know, a lot of ulceration in the eye there, corneal opacity, that just means it's really cloudy. Conjunctivitis, that means there's redness on the insides of the eyes, the mucous membranes. You can see all the mucous membranes are very red and inflamed and hemorrhagic looking. There was a lot of nasal discharge. The cow was actually urinating blood, hypersalivating. She had erosions around her nostrils and in her mouth. And, you know, ruminantly, that just means she wasn't eating very well. So here's the differential list. So what could this be? You know, as we're starting to think through, okay, what should we be worried about? Well, all of these things are things we should be worried about. Some of these diseases are endemic diseases, like the respiratory diseases are the first 3 there, BVD, bovine respiratory syncytial virus. We might also think about pink eye. This looks a little bit worse than pink eye though. If anybody's seen pink eye, it's usually pretty localized. But, you know, she was also had bloody diarrhea. So we think about, oh, well, maybe it's salmonella. Maybe she got into something toxic, or, you know, malignant catarrhal fever. That's a weird one. Maybe it's that. Or it could be blue tongue. So all of these things look clinically the same. So diseases can look alike, which is why it's so important to involve your veterinarian, because diseases can't be differentiated from each other without diagnostics. And it's really important at the state vet level, because a lot of these diseases, some of these diseases are foreign animal diseases, like foot and mouth disease looks exactly like malignant catarrhal fever and BVD and BRSV. So all these diseases look the same. So when you see something, don't just assume, hey, yeah, it's just a little cold. No, it actually could be something much worse. So get your vet out there and do your due diligence and get your diagnostics done. So I did get the diagnostics done, and sure enough, it came back as malignant catarrhal fever. And part of the history, I did ask them, are these cattle co-housed with any sheep? No, they are not. Do they have any fence line contact with sheep? No, but there's some sheep up the road a couple miles. And I knew from a prior case that, you know, actually this virus can be spread through the air for even several miles. And so I thought, well, it's on my differential list, which is why I tested this animal for malignant catarrhal fever. I hadn't put the Puyallup Fair piece together yet, but I knew that there was potential that they could have been exposed from these sheep that lived up the road. So when we think about, I just wanted to give you a brief overview. What is malignant catarrhal fever? Well, it's a herpes virus. There's two main types. There's the wildebeest type and there's the sheep kind, the herpes virus type 2. And really, sheep and goats look completely clinically normal. The virus has basically been adapted to that host, and so they just carry it around, and they carry it around for life. There's no vaccine for this, so we really can't protect animals when they get exposed. And cattle and bison are susceptible, but they're dead-end hosts. So what that means is the sheep and goats walk around and they're totally fine. When they're stressed, they start spreading this herpes virus around. And then these cattle and bison, they get infected and they get sick and they die, but they can't spread it to other animals. So a dead-end host means there's no transmission between them, but the sheep can spread it between each other. There's really high mortality. That means these bison and these cattle who get infected usually die, and there's usually low morbidity. So the ones that get sick, there's not like a bunch of sick animals. It's more like if you get sick, you're dead. So not a lot of animals get infected, but when they do get infected, they die.
So Dr. Idle, I don't want us to run out of time. I know you have a slide with tips.
Okay, we're gonna go quick. And so just real quick, this is how it's spread. The incubation period is usually long, which is the case with this in particular case, and we can have latent infections that go for up to 6 months. So what happened at the Puyallup Fair was there were several predisposing factors. I'm going to just run through these quickly and then I'll give you the tips and then we're done. So the tips are, do not co-house or co-mingle sheep and cattle. That's what happened at the Puyallup Fair. It was really humid. They had really unusual ventilation periods. We talked about stress already. But here's what the barn looked like. So I want you to think about the barn. Right in the middle are those red dots are the animals that were confirmed with MCF that actually ended up dying. And then you can see where the sheep pens are relative to the cattle pens. And then on either end, the blue arrows are ventilation. So the fans were actually coming into the middle of the barn and going out a ridge vent in the middle. So you'll see that, you know, the sheep pens are over here on the one side and all the airflow is coming up. Those animals in the middle are having the most exposure and then the air is coming out. So something to think about, tips and tricks. Think about your ventilation in the barn. You'll notice at the bottom as well, there's a wash rack, cattle wash rack, where the sheep were also sharing a wash rack. So again, we are having multiple species in the same barn with the same ventilation, and they're sharing a common wash rack. They're sharing equipment. Those are all naughty things on your naughty list. So, you know, when you're thinking about wash racks, I want you to look at this picture on another day when you have more time, and I want you to pick out all of the things that are wrong with this picture, you know, including water and how it's flowing and where their heads are and are we disinfecting and there's wood. I mean, there's a lot of issues here. I'll let you think about that for another day. And also just remembering that when we trail our animals together, even when they look clinically normal, a lot of these sheep and goats are harboring these viruses, and we're harboring lots of different viruses that maybe these animals have recovered from, but they're still subclinical carriers of disease. So don't forget that. And we also know that we can be carrying disease on our tires of our truck. And we know that a lot of animals show up at fairs like this. I've seen it. I think you all have, where they show up in the back of someone's car like this. So the outbreak was pretty big. We had 133 cattle in the barn, but 24 were confirmed. Well, there was 19 confirmed, 5 suspect, but there were probably even more animals that potentially could have died before we recognized what was going on here. And the virus doesn't discriminate. All breeds were affected, all ages were affected. And we had peak mortality at 9 weeks after the fair. So even though Sarah and I told you all that 30 days should be enough time, it's not. So for certain diseases, we're gonna see some extended incubation periods. So you'll see the first case was diagnosed on November 2nd. The Puyallup Fair is typically in September. We didn't get our first case diagnosis until November, 2 months later. And then you'll see we had cases the whole way out through February, all related to this outbreak at the Puyallup Fair. So it's just a good reminder. So here's the tips and tricks. These are your take-home points for things to think about, changes that should be adopted by fairs or at least considered. You might want to consider staggering fair check-in times or what days you check them in. So we don't want sheep and goats and cattle showing up at the fairgrounds at the same time with the same veterinarian checking them and going animal to animal to animal. What a great way to spread disease. We want species to have species-specific barns. So when we have these jackpot things and stuff, this is a huge concern because we might just have one barn where all the different animal species are sharing one space. It's really ideal if they can have their own specific barn, their own specific show rings and racks. And if you can't do that, show your cattle shows first, and then have your, and have those cattle out, and then do sheep shows after cattle shows are completely finished if you're going to share the same ring. You also can think about staggering show days at the fair. So we're going to do our cattle show days the first 3 days. We're going to do our sheep show days the second 2 days. So you don't have sheep coming in one day and cattle going in the next and then back and forth. We want to house sheep and lambs, especially lambs, because those are the ones that shed the most, downstream of ventilation so that they're the last thing on the row. So if the air is flowing this way, sheep are at the end and then it blows out the end of the barn. We don't want those, we don't want the virus blowing into the barn and exposing other animals. We want to also increase biosecurity. So if you have round robin exhibitors that are showing multiple species, be thinking really hard about that. When they're showing, what they're contacting, what are they doing? Do they wear coveralls? Are they changing their clothes? Are they changing their shoes? Making sure they're not sharing equipment between there's different animals that they're showing. We also want to think about, we don't want to share equipment. We talked about that pretty good with the wash racks. Think about barn ventilation. Think about that map I showed you when you're putting together where animals are going to be housed. And then think about human and animal traffic patterns. So this is hard at fairs because we have the public walking through through sheep barns and then walking through cattle barns. Thinking about how you can make the public stream through these barns maybe in a more directional way would be helpful, and also discouraging the public from touching animals.
So I know that we have had a great conversation with both of you, and you've brought different angles from both the state vet as well as the extension specialist trying to herd the youth and their animals and everything else. One of the key things that I think comes from this is the fact that it's your responsibility to make sure you and your animals are safe. And I think both of our guests today have shared some great opportunities and ideas for you to take back to your own place or to your youth or to educational stuff. Is there one last thing, just a quick 15-second thought that each of you want to share? Sarah, I'll start with you.
I guess the one thing I may not have said, I think it's been implied, is only show healthy animals. You kind of said it, Betsy, just a minute ago. It is our responsibility. And so if you have doubt, don't take that animal to the show. You're putting it at risk. It's going to stress and only going to get worse. And you're putting a lot of others. So only show healthy animals.
Excellent. And Dr. Idle, one.
No, I'll stick with what Sarah said. If you do a vet check and someone tells you the animal's sick, take it home and recognize that it's the best thing you can do for you and for everybody else at that fairgrounds, for both a public health and animal health point of view.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So Julie, I am going to turn it back over to you. Thank you so much to both of you. So Julie, it's all yours.
Super. That was fantastic information we just heard from Sarah Smith and Dr. Idle. Thanks for sharing your experiences and giving us some real practical tips that folks can implement with their animal projects. This is going to be great for folks, whether they're working with livestock large or small, going to fairs, or being at home. And thank you, Betsy, for facilitating today's conversation. Speaking of the conversation, we don't want it to end here. We have created a new forum in the Healthy Farms Biosecurity subgroup in Connect Extension, where we can continue to exchange questions and experiences with youth biosecurity education. If you aren't already a member of Connect Extension, it's easy to join. It's easy to register for an account, and then you can sign up for whatever subgroups are of interest to you. The Healthy Farms Biosecurity Community subgroup has established forums on 3 topics at this point: composting mortalities, One Health, and youth biosecurity education. You can create and respond to topics and set up your notifications to suit you, which is very important. You do that through your profile. But you may be wondering, well, why would you want to join a discussion forum? Well, I think it's a great place to keep the conversation going because you won't lose a great response in your email folder and not be able to find it again. It's right there under the topic that started the conversation going. So we see the forums as a great way to expand your circle of trusted advisors and to be able to participate in a learning network with others who have common interests. We all have benefited from learning from the experience of others and probably have had the opportunity to share our experience with others. And the forum is a great way for that to happen asynchronously and all across the country. So we want to encourage those who have joined today's session to participate in the forum and get and keep the conversation going. So how about starting by sharing an experience you had with an animal health or public health issue associated with a fair or field day or show or exhibition? We'd love to see your story in the forum. So we're just about at the end of our session today, and this is concluding the third of our 4 sessions in this series on youth biosecurity education. Thank you again for joining us for a Healthy Farms, Healthy Agriculture community conversation. We hope that you will join us next time. And I also want to remind folks that while the focus of this project is agricultural biosecurity, many of the concepts are relevant and applicable to public health today. So I encourage you to keep doing all you can to keep COVID-19 at bay. Until next time, live well and biosecurely.